Well guys, here we go. I'm cranking out these Z4 videos back to back. Just so many new parts and so many updates on this car. And I actually wasn't gonna do a video on this, but the video is gonna be on installing the CSF radiator, the all aluminum one, because there is another option where it is plastic. I went all out and got the aluminum one. And the reason that I wasn't going to do a video is because I thought it was going to be as straightforward as the E90 and the E82 and all the other N54 models. Pretty much you undo some bolts and then just pull the fan shroud out and then unhook the hoses and replace the radiator. But in the case of the Z4, it is a little bit different. So I'm going to show you guys. We're going to start off by removing the underbody panels, which I already did. Like I said, I already got a little head start on this. And then after you remove the underbody panels, you're also going to want to remove the intercooler. So if you have the stock intercooler, you'll remove that. But if you have an aftermarket one, it's not too hard. You're also going to want to remove that. And I'll show you guys that right now. Here's the intercooler. It's out already. It's pretty straightforward, like I told you guys. What I do is I remove the top clamp here, just because I think it's much easier to reinstall by doing the top clamp instead of the bottom one. So the couplers came off on both of these sides. And then lastly, I did these Torx bolts, which hold the intercooler. And they go from the bottom. I just placed them here so I wouldn't lose them. And then once you get to the last Torx bolt, you're going to want to have some support on the bottom of the intercooler so it doesn't just fall right out. So again, guys, pretty easy on the intercooler. I'm just covering these holes right now. Now we'll go underneath the car and I'll show you guys the underside. The next thing that you're going to want to do while you're down here, so you can see all this open area, you're going to want to remove the bolt that holds the transmission cooler onto the electric fan shroud. That will help removing the fan. So you need to undo that. And then you can see that I put some of the towels in here in these holes so they wouldn't be open on both sides. So that's where the intercooler was connected to. So that does it for the bottom. We're going to go back on top and remove the rest of the bolts required to remove this fan shroud. Don't mind how oily it is down here. It's nothing because of my car or neglect. Actually, my aftermarket cooler lines failed. They got a little slit in them, so it was leaking all the oil and it got everything dirty. So let's move on to the top. Now you're going to want to remove this Torx bolt over here, which you can see there. There's the hole, the empty hole. I removed the Torx bolt there, unplugged this connector here. So it was connected right there. So that's unplugged. And then there is a retaining clip right there. You can see right there. The electric fan shroud just drops into place there. So there isn't really anything to unbolt. It just pops out. Now here comes the part where everything's a lot different for the Z4. As you can see, there's not much space to get that fan shroud out. You still have the coolant overflow hose that goes across here. So you're gonna wanna make sure you pop that out of place from those clips right there and on the other side. And then I also have, I believe this is for the hood release. Now, in order to get this fan shroud out, because everything is now undone to get it out, these are just kind of in the way. But as opposed to the E90 and E80 chassis, we're going to be, which I already did, again, I had a head start on this, undoing these Torx bolts. So you can see that I took this one out, and this one out on this side. And it's pretty much the same thing on this side. You can see that that one's gone, and this one's gone. So these you don't have to worry about. This can now just come right out. And you can see we have plenty of space here to remove the fan shroud and the radiator when we get to that point. So that's an important detail that I wanted to show you guys that will help a lot. So I'm going to move this to the back and kind of set all the bolts aside with it so that I know which bolts go to this shroud. And we'll move on to removing the electric fan. Now with the electric fan shroud out, you can see how much more room there is, especially when we remove this OEM radiator. there's going to be a ton of extra room to do whatever other upgrades or parts that you want to replace. And that is why I am doing a complete coolant system overhaul. I'm actually replacing a ton of hoses, the water pump, the thermostat, and I'm going to be moving the coolant reservoir tank to the other side, along with the relocated inlets, which will be over here. So I don't want to jump too ahead of myself. And that's why I was really hesitant on this video, is because it's not going to really relate too much to you guys because I'm going completely overboard. Whereas some of you might just be doing the radiator and calling it a day. But with all this extra room, and once we remove the radiator, it only makes sense to go ahead and do all of that. For the next step right now, we're going to drain all the coolant out of the OEM radiator. Guys, another reason to upgrade to the aluminum CSF radiator. Look at this drain plug. It completely sucks. It's plastic and the surrounding housing is plastic. I didn't have a flathead big enough to take this off. So what I ended up doing was using this small pry bar and holding the nut on top of this. So basically this is inside of a plastic nut that's holding it. And I held that nut with this 19mm wrench and then just unscrewed this with this small pry bar. Now I'll go underneath the car and show you guys exactly where I'm talking about, but I just wanted to explain this little weird setup that I had in order to take this off. You can see here, it's starting to drain out. There's where I'm talking about. You can see that surrounding housing of that blue plug is a bolt shape, which is why I held it with that wrench. But I'm gonna let this drain out. Remove the expansion tank cap and it'll start draining out even faster. So I'm going to let that drain for quite a while. It will be a few hours for me, but you guys will see when I start filming the next clip, in which I'll start removing hoses from the radiator so that we can completely take out the radiator. So I'll see you guys then. Update time. I took off the upper radiator hose to both the oil filter housing and the radiator, which includes this overflow hose that goes all the way over to the coolant reservoir. So I'll show you guys a little more in detail. I just wanted to show you the hoses there. We go over here. I put a towel in the hole of the oil filter housing so nothing gets in there. You can see that the hose is no longer there here. Same with the overflow tank. The hose is not connected anymore, and I put a piece of tape there so nothing gets in there. And then there is an HVAC hose or heater hose that connects to this coolant hose underneath, which is right here. So I also disconnected that and put a piece of tape in there. After that, I also disconnected that lower radiator hose right there, but there's actually two. So you have to disconnect both of those, which I already did. And then finally, the hose that goes to the transmission cooler. So it's also a coolant hose. And you don't want to disconnect it from the radiator. You can see there's a bolt right there. You want to disconnect it from the transmission cooler where it connects. You can see right there, I disconnected that already. So as we're doing this job, you can see more and more of all the things that are easily accessible now that you can replace. So the cooler is also another thing that I'm going to be replacing, but we're all good to remove this radiator now. So I have to undo this Torx bolt right here at the top. Same with the other side. There's another Torx bolt, as you can see right there. So complete opposite side, same exact place. And then we should be able to pull out this radiator. And there is this little trim here that is on top of the radiator. I believe it's for vibration with the hood and a seal for the hood when it's closed. So we can see if we can go ahead and transfer this to the new aluminum radiator. I'm not quite sure if we can, but we can remove it for now. So you can see these little slots here. You can push back on them and peel this off and just save it for later, just in case we can use it with the aluminum radiator. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. When you're pulling out the radiator, be extremely careful because there is a lot of plastic surrounding in the shroud. So while you're managing to pull that out, be very careful, take your time, and just manage everything as you're pulling it out. You don't want to break anything else while you're pulling it out. So I wanted to mention that as well. Guys, I really don't recommend this. But if you're going to be reusing that hose that's down here that you'll be left with when you remove that radiator, you can remove the Torx bolt and pull it out. But you really don't want to. I mean, you're already there. You might just replace all the hoses. So I'm not going to keep that. I did take it off just so that I could use it as a reference for my new hose in case I get mixed up. I have it sitting over here. So you can see I place it off to the side along with all the other parts. This hose is brand new, so that's why I'm keeping that one and reusing it. That whole assembly is brand new. So I'm doing what I'm preaching. I didn't want you guys thinking that that was an old hose. This does make a giant mess, so be careful with that. I already did some cleaning here because it leaked even more coolant. And then another thing that I did here is I zip tied the transmission cooler to this brace that goes across here, just so it wasn't putting any extra strain on those lines, because I do not have a part number to replace those transmission lines. I'm not really quite sure what I'm going to do on that. I'm still thinking on it, so I haven't made a final decision. I should replace them, but I have to find where I can locate those lines to replace them. Otherwise, at this point, you would be all set to put in the new aluminum radiator and then just go backwards from there on everything we did. However, with this coolant system overhaul, there are other steps that I'm going to take before I even do that. And I'm going to take advantage of all this space that I have right now. As you can see, it is an insane amount of space with the radiator off. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to remove these OEM inlets. So that'll give me even more space, but I'm not going to quite yet replace that with a relocated inlet, because that's going to give me the space to start to take off the belt, replace the belt. The pulleys are fairly new, so I'm not going to be doing that, but I'm going to be replacing the crank hub pulley down there. You can see right there, because I'm doing the crank guard seal from VTT. I hate their products, but I'm going to be using that one along with the bolt lock kit while I'm down there. So I'm going to be putting those two items, and then after I get done with that, I'm going to go ahead and start just pulling all the coolant hoses off, giving me even more space again so that I can remove the water pump, the thermostat, replace those, remove the coolant reservoir, and move it to the other side with the relocation kit that comes with the Precision Raceworks relocated inlets. So there's plenty to do. That's a quick summary. I'm going to be adding even more things as we go along, but I wanted to give you an update as to why I'm not going to be putting the CSF radiator quite yet. I don't even know how much I'll be filming, but I'll try my best just because it's so much work that we're going to be doing here. For sure you'll get to see the relocated inlets, but as of everything else, I'm not quite sure. Alright boys, so what I did now was remove the filter, so one of the dual cone filters on this inlet here, and then there are two Torx screws that mount right next to each other to kind of secure that inlet in place. Sorry guys, it's hard to see, but you can see the tabs going up there. So I removed those Torx bolts to loosen the inlet, and then this inlet also has these brackets that hold the hoses. So one of the hoses goes to the Mickey Mouse flange here. The other one routes down to the thermostat. So I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe that the thermostat is in front of the water pump. So that hose, I believe, goes to that thermostat, which is the one that we previously removed on the radiator. So I also unhooked that from the thermostat and I pulled it off, so more coolant came out and it's starting to drain out. Now I'm able to remove that hose entirely. I don't know if I can really show you guys that well, but here I'm pulling on it and you can see it's loose here, and you can see the bottom half there. You can see both of the ends. Slowly, one by one, we're going to be removing all the hoses. As you can see, BMW on the N54, I believe for all of the models, they really packed in all the coolant hoses the water pump and the thermostat in this area. So this area right here is super compact with very little space and very little movement and visibility. As I keep saying, with all these little things that we keep removing, it gives us access to other things that we can replace. One of which next is I'm going to try to remove the, let's see if we can get a good view here. Okay, so we can see the hose there attached to the expansion tank right there in the middle. So we can remove that and remove this 10mm bolt over here and add more workspace to this area by moving the coolant tank. And you're going to also want to remove the vacuum lines that attach to the coolant tank so you don't rip them. But yeah, I'm going to keep moving forward and I'll let you guys know what other hoses I remove, but gave you a basic rundown of the next two items that I'm going to remove, so I'm going to keep at it and keep you guys posted. That hose is now gone. It was pretty hard to actually kind of get out just because of that other cross brace right there. But as long as you're careful and you navigate that hose correctly, it'll come right out. Once I removed that hose, I moved on to the reservoir and I unhooked the hose. As you can see, it's right there. And then I undid the 10mm bolt. And before I pulled it completely out of the grommet, I made sure to unplug the harness for the coolant level sensor so that you don't rip that wire. So make sure to do that before you completely pull out that reservoir. There's a little more open space over here and you can see a little bit more of what you're working with. Those outlets for the turbos are definitely in the way of everything. It's gonna make the job a little harder, but we're gonna manage. So after further research, I actually found out that unless you have upgraded turbos, you don't need to worry about upgrading your outlets or getting those aluminum 2-inch outlets. And that's because at some point, too much airflow is not good for OEM turbos. So I'm going to keep these outlets, so I'm not going to be removing them because until I upgrade to the Muscleman turbos. So I wanted to give you guys an explanation for that. Before I remove another hose, now really looking at this area, I really want to try to get this inlet completely removed. So I'm going to keep working my way in there and see if there's any easy way to get that inlet out before I move on to any of the other hoses. This front inlet doesn't even really have a clamp here where it attaches to the turbo. So you can literally just pull it off. Once you pull it off the turbo there, then just make sure to turn the inlet upwards so the holes are facing you. That way you're able to maneuver it out of its original position and take it out, meaning you don't really have to cut it or anything. But I'm going to remove this from the inlet because I'm going to keep that for the filters and to give them to my friend who also has an N54. But as for this entire plastic piece, I'm going to be throwing it away. And for now, since I'm not going to be doing anything down there quite yet, I'm going to cover that open turbo hole. Alright boys, I moved on to the other side, so I actually replaced two hoses now. And not to get confused with the regular coolant hoses, these are HVAC hoses that go back to the heater core. So you can see that I have tape on them to cover the open holes, but these are the new hoses. Here you can see the old HVAC hoses set to the side. When you take them out, the clips will still be in place holding them together. You can take those old clips out and transfer them to the new hoses. So make sure you do that just so you're completely OEM and they're all secure and in place when you reinstall them. So you can see how they clip into place. I actually had to disconnect the old HVAC hose from the hose that runs along the bottom of the car. So you can see that one there. And then follow those hoses back, and along the way there will be clips that you can undo. And then just keep following it back, unclip it. As you can see, there's another set of clips there. However, you don't have to completely take those clips out of the bracket. You can just undo the clips from the other side. They unhook and you can pop out the old hoses. And then finally we run back all the way over here and you can see they're color coded. So one is yellow and one is green. And the hoses have a green line and a yellow line also, just so it helps you not get those hoses mixed up. But you'll undo those two clamps and then just pop the hoses out and just maneuver them all the way out and then just put the new ones in like I did. So these are already all in place and ready to go. So I'm just going to leave them for now. But since I had all this room right now, I went ahead and changed those out. It was perfect time to do that. So I think now what's going to happen is I'm going to completely undo that bottom hose you can see there that I said I disconnected from, right there in the middle of the screen. So that one runs along the bottom here. There's a Torx bolt there in the middle of the screen that you can see that holds that hose in place. And then as we go along the bottom here, the transmission cooler is kind of in the way, but you can see there's another Torx bolt there in the middle of the screen, and there's one on the other side right there. So we'll have to undo those. And as you can see, then it tees off into the transmission cooler. So we'll also have to undo that from the transmission cooler before we can completely take that hose off. Also, we keep going over here onto this side. It's going to be hard to tell, but that same hose tees off again another time. I believe it goes to the water pump, so you're going to have to disconnect it from the water pump. And then the water pump also tees off, and I believe the hose that tees off of the water pump goes to the coolant reservoir. I'm not 100% sure, but as we undo all these hoses, we'll get a better look. And I'll make sure to show you guys that entire hose once I get it out so you can see it for yourself and have a better view of where it exactly tees off at every single point in the hose. That entire hose system is now out. So I removed the bolts and all the connections of where it teed off into, and it came off pretty easily, and I was able to maneuver it out. I didn't really run into any issues. You'll kind of notice that it is really close to this outlet pipe, so it seems like it won't pull off of that connection behind it, but it will, and then there's enough room to get it out. So I have that set aside now, and you can see a lot more of the subframe here. I have the new hose set aside, so I'll show you guys that hose just to get a better view of the hose since you guys couldn't really see it from up here. As you'll see, probably not good that I already cut it. I should have shown you guys this hose system before I started modifying it. But you'll see that here's where it goes off into the upper radiator hose and the HVAC system, and then it bolts down there. Same with these two little brackets down here where it bolts into. And then you have this hose that goes into the automatic transcooler. Now, when we get over here, there's another T-system, which we undid this one to remove the hose, the entire system. But there's this one that I already cut that goes up into the coolant reservoir. Now, the reason that I cut this is because we are actually going to be going off this connection here, and the new hose is going to go all the way to the driver's side so that we can do our coolant reservoir relocation. So that is why I have this cut off. I still have to get the clamp off, and I still have to get the clamp off of this connection so that I can transfer this OEM connection onto the new hose so that we still have that OEM fitment and secure connection, because as you know, BMW has their little connections here that you can't really cheap out on. That's why if you try to get an off-brand hose, they will sometimes work, but most of the times they will end up leaking because you really need to go OEM with your hoses. So we'll clamp this onto the new hose and it'll go all the way to the other side and be relocated. So that's why I did that. We completed some more work with the Dremel. There was a hose connected to this connection here, which connects to the thermostat. I cut that hose off and the clamp with a Dremel, and then inserted this relocation coolant reservoir hose that will go to the driver's side. So you can see it goes all the way to the other side with a 90-degree angle. And then we also were left over with the other side of the hose that had the connection that connects to the coolant reservoir. So it was kind of like this. So we cut that off as well. So we're going to put this on this end of the hose. And I'm going to wait on this just because I want the orientation to be right. I don't want to just put it on and then clamp it on and then have to shift it again in order to get it to fit properly, because remember, these connections are very picky. So I'm going to hold off on this. I just wanted to show you guys this part of the process. It was a good time to get this done. This hose was not really that easy to fit onto the connection. Had to lube it up with some synthetic grease to get this on, but it does seem secure now, so we got that on. This isn't going to be put on until later, but I thought since I had the Dremel out, it would be a good time to get those connections loose. We're leaving off on this for now until we get the water pump and thermostat back on. Now, I did notice that there's another hose that I did not order and I still need to replace, and that's this hose right here. I will get the exact name of it, but I don't know it as of right now. I just know that it goes from the radiator to the turbo, so you could see, I'll try to get a good look at it. In the middle of the screen there, you can see the clamp of where that hose connects to that outlet there. I'll get the proper name of that hose for you guys. There's also the Mickey Mouse flange hose that I did not get. When I did this aluminum upgrade, I only got the flange, I didn't get the hose. So here's the perfect time to get the replacement hose. And that one goes all the way down to the back of either the thermostat or water pump. I'm not 100% sure. But we need to order those two hoses so I can replace those. For the next step, I'm going to be looking up how to correctly remove those transmission cooler lines so I can remove that transmission cooler completely. And once that's done, we can move on to removing those two hoses. And by then, hopefully those hoses arrive after I order them. Guys, I was overthinking the transmission cooler lines. They aren't really that complicated. All you have to do is push the tabs on both sides of that connector here. And if you're having issues, try to use a small plier so you don't have that much leverage that you break the plastic, and twist them around and eventually they'll come loose. So swivel it side to side just to get that connection loose and then pop it off. So you don't need a special tool or anything to disconnect those. Those are now disconnected. Quite a bit of coolant did end up coming out of there, so be prepared for that. I'm just moving on to the belt, and as you can see, I took off the caps off of these pulleys and then loosened the bolts here. So with a T50, I also moved on to the crank hub pulley and loosened those E-Torx bolts. So those are also loose. Make sure that you loosen all of those bolts before you go on to the tensioner and release the belt, because it's going to be a lot harder loosening all those bolts with the belt off. I'll get that belt off and then we're going to move on to removing the crank hub pulley. We now have all the pulleys removed, so you can see where the tensioner was, where the idler pulley was, and also where the crank hub pulley was. It's kind of shifted to the side, but that crank guard seal is going to be mounted here, and there's two bolts right next to each other that we need to take out in order to install the seal guard. But you can see how dirty it is. You could definitely take some time to clean all of this. For me, it's even more dirty because of that oil spill that I had. So I'm going to take my time to also clean this area with some degreaser. You can see right here, just to give you a look at the tensioner, pulley, and crank hub pulley. Also, I did go overboard and I wasn't supposed to loosen that second bolt. It doesn't do any damage, but you only need to loosen this bolt. Now here are the two products that we're going to be installing while we're in there. So you can see on the right is the seal guard and on the left is the crank bolt capture. I do hate VTT, it's one of my least favorite companies for BMW, but it was a better deal to get the crank bolt capture and the seal guard together as a package. Otherwise I would have just gotten the crank bolt capture and gotten a different seal guard like the ECS tuning one. So I wanted to show you the two products. We're going to go ahead and install the seal guard. However, I don't know quite yet if I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the crank hub pulley just because of that cleaning that I want to do in that area. I'll update you guys when I can. The crank guard seal is installed. Those bolts don't go on very tight, so you don't have to worry about tightening those. I did put just a dab of blue Loctite on each bolt just to be safe. So that's all done. Now, the crank bolt capture system won't be installed quite yet. I am actually in the process of trying to refinish the crank hub pulley. or harmonic balancer is the proper name for this. I just want to get a coat of high temperature paint on it that also really adheres to the base, even if it was a little bit corroded, just to give it a clean look. And it's already out, so I thought I'd do that. I'm not going to try to put too many layers of paint, just because I know a lot of people have said that these are really finicky and are balanced from factory or something like that. I'm not an expert on that, but I'm not going to do too many layers of paint. Just so you guys know, I taped off the area of where the belt goes on, so it's all taped off. In case any of you are trying to refinish your harmonic balancer, just make sure you tape off that area. And I also taped off the other side of where it actually mounts onto the block, because I didn't really want to put any paint in that area since it's going to be bolted up to the block. I also disconnected this other coolant hose, a really short one right there in the middle of the screen is where it connects. It's a very tight fit, but you can get a ratchet on there or a flathead to loosen the clamp and kind of turn it a bit so that then you can put a socket on it. But that is a really short coolant hose that I showed you guys that we are going to go ahead and replace. That usually doesn't come in most coolant overhaul kits, so you'll have to order that individually. Here's that odd hose that I disconnected, and you can see that it connects to the radiator, and we have a small clamp there with a 6mm bolt. So that's the part that I will put in the description of the video, one of the odd hoses. Now we can move on to the Mickey Mouse coolant hose that we're going to also be upgrading. And what I noticed on that one is that it's kind of hard to tell and see, but you can just barely see the hose clamp there. And what I think happened is when the water pump and thermostat were both installed, the hoses were already pre-installed on them. So there is no way that I'm going to get a socket on that clamp to loosen it. I think I'll have to remove the water pump and thermostat in order to get that hose out with them. So I'm going to continue working on that and see what happens. Alright guys, so I loosened this clamp over here. It's a 6mm bolt. This is the U-shaped hose that connects to the back of the thermostat. So if you see here in the middle of the screen, there's the hose clamp. And then once you loosen that clamp, you're able to loosen these two bolts up here. So you can see one on the left, there's a hole right there in the middle of the screen, and one to the right in the middle of the screen. So that will release the thermostat from the water pump. So that way we're able to take out the thermostat completely, because right now the other hose that's connected to the thermostat is the Mickey Mouse hose that goes all the way to the Mickey Mouse coolant flange. So the only thing we really need to pry off is this hose clamp that we just loosened here in the middle of the screen that's connected to the U-shaped hose. So that's the only thing holding it in place right now. And once I go up top, I'm going to just kind of try to jiggle that out. I'll show you guys everything that comes out with it. The only hard part will be removing this U-shaped hose right here. So maybe just grab a pick and try to go along the edge of that hose opening to kind of loosen it up a bit and make it easier to take that thermostat housing out. As you guys can see now, the thermostat housing is super far forward over here, kind of loose. So before we get that out completely, I still have to take off this clamp here from the Mickey Mouse flange right there. So it's pretty simple. It's not another weird BMW connection. I just have to release that clamp, and then we can take the hose off of here, and then that whole assembly is going to come out, and I'll set it aside so you guys can see it, and we'll move on to the water pump removal. Here's also the connector to disconnect from that thermostat housing before you completely remove it. Just thought I'd show you guys quick. You don't want to yank this off and break it. But now that thermostat housing is out, I can show you guys over here. Here's the long hose that stays connected. And then now we can really look at the thermostat housing here. And here's the hose that went off into the radiator. Then this one's the one that was attached to that U-shaped hose. And then we also have another place here that we disconnected previously, if you guys remember. So a lot of different connections on the thermostat housing, not as many on the water pump, but I wanted to show you guys this configuration so you can see it better. It gives you a better idea. of what it looks like before you go on and attack it pretty much. So only 2 bolts really hold that on, like I showed you guys earlier. Usually people are doing the project while they're watching the video. Sometimes I recommend watching a video completely before taking on the project, but this has kind of been a long video already. As I told you guys, this is an insane coolant system rehaul. We'll be moving on to the water pump now. While we're up here, I can actually show you guys one of the bolts. So it's a E-Torx bolt. You can see it in the middle of the screen that you can access from up here. Pretty easy to get to once the thermostat's out. But there are also 2 bolts on the bottom, so a total of 3 for the water pump housing. So I'll show you guys the 2 bottom E-Torx bolts, but while we're up here, you guys can see in the middle of the screen the one up top. Now there you can see the E-Torx bolt there. 2 of them. Should be able to get them. A lot of people say to release the sway bar to get to them, but with some swivel sockets or some improvising, you are able to get to these. So let's go ahead and get this water pump out. Alright, so all those bolts are loose, and guess what, guys? Yet another hose to order and replace. So this hose I did not order, and I'm trying to get you guys to get a good look at it. Okay, so in the middle of the screen there, you can see that hose, not the one that has that open hole, but the one above it. So right there we go, I can point to it, that makes it easier. So we're gonna have to loosen that one in order to take out the water pump. I know I said it was just the bolts, and it would be coming out with that U-shaped hose that we disconnected from the thermostat, but that's not the case. There's another one, and I don't have that as a replacement, so we're gonna have to order it. I'm trying to get the best lighting here, but it's not that easy, apparently. I'm gonna loosen that hose from this one right here, get that off the water pump, and then also disconnect it from back there somehow. I haven't really seen how it unhooks. It probably is going to be a pain in the ass, but that's another good hose that you'll want to replace. And I'm thinking of going silicone with that one, because that one's buried. So if you ever want to replace that, it's going to be a pain in the ass to get to. I'm going to look for you guys and do some investigating. There we go. We got some better lighting there, to see if we can find a silicone replacement for that hose, because I don't even know what that one's called or what it's really attached to. It looks like an outlet of some sort, or turbo. Some of you that know a lot more than I do probably have an idea and are thinking, what is this guy thinking? But we'll go ahead and do those 2 things, and then once that hose is out, I can get you a better look at it. Same with the water pump. Just like the thermostat, the water pump is electric, so we have an electrical connector right there. So before you completely remove the water pump, make sure to disconnect that so you don't rip that harness as well. As you can see, let's try to get good lighting again. That elbow hose over there is still there. I still got to figure out how to disconnect it from the rear so that I can replace that. Now I'll show you guys the water pump outside of the engine. So here's the orientation in which it was in when it was inside the car. So here we have that odd hose that we're going to order, and then the U-shaped hose that I was talking about earlier. It has this heat shield on it so that it doesn't wear sooner than later. And we went ahead and ordered this, but ECS Tuning also makes a aluminized silicone hose for this. And that is important because this is one of the hoses that you don't want to have to replace later on. So definitely 100%, no matter what, do not reuse this hose. It is a pain in the ass to replace. You're pretty much going to have to do the job all over again. So go ahead and get the ECS Tuning silicone aluminized U-shaped hose, which I'll show you guys when it gets here. And we're going to install that on the new water pump that I have before we install it, just like we removed this one. We have another hose to order that I wasn't anticipating, but I'll show you guys the silicone hoses that I did order later on, which is this one and the Mickey Mouse hose that I keep talking about over here that's still attached to the thermostat. Those haven't arrived yet, but I will make sure to show you guys those. This area is now clear. So once I order that new hose to replace that elbow, then we can go ahead and install the new water pump, new thermostat, all the new hoses. But as of right now, the next step will be doing some more cleaning in here because you can see how dirty it is. We're going to try to get this all cleaned up before we move on. This is the elbow fitting that we took off. So this isn't actually the one that we took off, but this is the replacement. This is a silicone version, and you can see it's from Euro Parts. It actually has a part number, but I'll still be putting it in the description so you guys can find it. And one of the clamps is easy to take off. You can take it off from underneath the car. However, the rear one is a one-time use clamp, so I actually had to cut it in order to get it off with a Dremel. So that's going to be a pain in the ass. It took me a couple days just because I have a really crappy Dremel and that area is very small. So this is going to be a real headache for you guys, but once you get the silicone version, you shouldn't have much to worry about. I'm not going to be using these two clamps that came with it. I have my own T-style clamps that I'll be using, but I wanted to show you guys the part. As you guys can see, I got that 90-degree coolant feed pipe silicone replacement hose on. It's not clamped down quite yet just because I feel like once I get the water pump and the thermostat installed, I'll have to rotate it a bit or make adjustments. So I haven't tightened the clamp quite yet. The next hose that I'm going to install while we're here is the one that goes right next to it. So if you can see there in the middle of the screen, that bare pipe there. So that's only for automatic transmissions. That hose connects straight to the radiator. So I'm going to go ahead and put that new hose on. And like I said, all these hoses will be in the description. I could not find a silicone replacement for that, although it's not really hard to get to, so it's not that big of a deal. I'm more concerned of replacing the hoses with silicone, the ones that are really hard to get to. I'll go ahead and throw that on as well, and I'll show you guys what it looks like afterwards. Here's the other hose we're going to throw on right now. And the way to know of how to put this back on is on this side here, there's a little slit in the hose, which you will line up with that coolant pipe. There's a little knob on the top. So that's what we're going to line up. And once we got that on, we're all set for that hose. Just once we get the radiator on, we can actually get it connected. So make sure to throw on a clamp before you put it on. You can see that I oriented the clamp so that way I can tighten it from the top here. But that hose is now on. You can see it right over here. So two of those hoses are now on and replaced for now. We're pretty down to bare bones right now, so I decided to move on to the relocated inlets. I have a ton of space. I'm just going to move on to the relocated inlets. And as you can see here, you can see that turbo right there in the middle of the screen, pretty shiny there. And the Precision Raceworks relocated inlets come with these adapters. It allows you to use the bigger inlets, so you need this adapter in order to run the bigger inlets. So we're going to install this, and actually it only came with one locking screw. I'm not sure if that was just me, but on both of these adapters, it only came with one screw. The flange on the OEM turbos is 1.75 inches, and this adapter allows us to use the 2-inch inlets that came with this kit. So we'll go ahead and throw this on. So that's what I'm going to do right now is just slide this on and lock it into place. So just put it on and make sure it's placed in a manner that you can tighten this down. Update, no complaint on that one lockdown bolt. That was enough. It was actually already really snug without me tightening that locking bolt. So just remember to orientate it the right way so that you can lock it down even more. But definitely no complaints. Now that that's on, as you can see, there's a very small area for me to fit this relocated inlet here for the front turbo. And what I am noticing and I'm looking into is you see that giant bolt right there. So I'm pointing at it with the flashlight in the middle of the screen. That's definitely in the way. So it's making it a little bit harder, but I will update you guys as I figure this out here. But you can see how small that hole is. The inlet is in, so it's a really picky process actually. So what you want to do is before you get this inlet in here at all and trying to angle it in to get it onto that adapter, you're going to want to flatten this inlet a little bit. So press it up against the wall and kind of squish it closed, just so that it fits a little bit better. I know it sounds really stupid, and I thought the same, just because you would think that they would innovate this a little bit more to have a better fitment, but because of that giant bolt right there, this makes the process a lot harder than it really should be. My thought would be that they make a longer adapter, which would set it a little bit closer over here, but I don't know, whatever. So first I put the clamp on to the inlet and pushed it past the inlet into the adapter because the wastegate is in the way. So if you try to put both the inlet and the clamp on at the same time, the clamp won't get past that wastegate. So make sure you push the clamp through onto the adapter first, and then once you get the inlet onto the adapter, then you can put the clamp back on and tighten it down. All right, guys, I am underneath the car over by the water pump and thermostat area. So obviously you wouldn't have this much clearance if you have the water pump and thermostat in. Because we have those out, you can see the clamp here in the middle of the screen for that inlet. Pretty easy to get to. So I tightened it from down here. But like I said, it might be a lot harder if both the water pump and thermostat are still in. So this is why I'm saying that this is the best time to go ahead and basically go overboard and overhaul everything. But anyways, we'll continue on here. This is how it will look once you're done. Here, it sits pretty far forward. I previously had my canisters right here, kind of facing that way, but I had to move them to face this way now because I feel like they're gonna be in the way. They might even be in the way here, but if anything, I'll move them again. I'm using zip ties to hold these canisters down. So we'll see. There's still another little adapter that goes on this end, and then you put the filter on. I'm not gonna put the filters on quite yet, so that'll be at the end. But once I get this adapter on for the filter, we will be done with the front inlet. It was a little harder than I thought it would be. I thought the front inlet would be super easy, but I was wrong just because of that bolt. So then we'll move on to the rear inlet, which is supposed to be the hard one. So we'll see. As you can see, there's a lot more room back here, so hopefully it's easier on the Z4, but we're about to find out. For the rear inlet, I'm going to start with this outlet here that goes to the catch can that's connected to the inlet. The other inlet for the catch can goes all the way to the valve cover, so we don't have to worry about that PCV system there. So that's the only one that I'm going to disconnect there. And then towards the back of the engine, there in the middle of the screen, you see one loose Torx bolt. There's the other one. So now you can see both of them. One's already loose, but I'm going to loosen the other one, and that should release the inlet. Then it goes all the way down to the rear turbo, where we will pop it off of the rear turbo. The problem that 335i and 135i owners have with this rear inlet is that you can't really maneuver it out of here, and a lot of the people cut it. For the Z4, we're going to see if we can maneuver it out, and if we can't, I'm going to try to cut it as well from the top though, because for the other people, they try to cut it from the bottom. So I'll keep you guys updated as I keep going. I disconnected the electrical connector. You can see there, it's hanging over here to the side. But now the next step is I want to disconnect this adapter here that I connected with the oil catch can to this 90-degree fitting that goes into the inlet. I was able to disconnect the 90-degree fitting from the inlet. So I did not separate the 90-degree fitting from the oil catch can hose. I was able to do it this way. I was able to do that by actually just breaking the tabs on the inlet here that were holding that 90-degree fitting. So there's tabs on each side that you can just break off, and then this will pop right out. So make sure that you break the plastic tabs that are on the inlet and not anything that has to do with this 90-degree fitting here that we will probably be reusing on the relocated inlets, just to be sure. In case we do, I would think so, but I'm just going step by step at the moment. I'm not 100% sure, just want to be cautious. And as you can see, this is extremely loose now. But if we look back here, you can see there's one more bracket here that's holding the inlet. So you can see here in the middle of the screen, there's another Torx bolt right there that's holding this little bracket. It's not really that secure of a bracket. It's more like of a retainer, but it will make it a lot easier to pop this inlet out if we remove that bracket. So a stubby Torx bit would probably do the job, which is what I'm probably going to use to get that bolt out. And then we're going to be able to see if we can maneuver this inlet out or not. Wow, guys, no cutting was needed on the rear inlet on the Z4. So you see this little bracket here? Once we remove this bracket that's holding on the inlet from the rear, left rear corner, you can pull the inlet off of the rear turbo, pull it out from the other side. So pull it from the driver's side here and kind of twist it as you're pulling it out, just maneuvering it, and it comes out completely. So you don't even need to cut it or anything, or even remove the downpipes like the 135i or the 335i owners. So that rear inlet is completely out now. I can go ahead and toss that, and we can work on putting in the 2-inch silicone inlet. I also wanted to note that you may be left with this on the turbo flange. So this might stay behind. Make sure you get this off before we put that adapter on. So the same adapter that we put on the front turbo, I slid it on the rear turbo flange. So just make sure you get this off. Update, I ended up removing this cross brace bar here and then unmounted this wiring harness loom from it. So it's sitting over here. That just gave me a bit more space, and I was able to maneuver the inlet through here and connect it to the rear turbo. All I have to do is tighten the clamp back there. So make sure you have the clamp on there kind of tight, just so that it doesn't drop or fall off before you try to maneuver this in. Also, since this is the 2-inch inlet, you might not run into this issue with the regular size inlet. I'm not quite sure, but I did take this to the carpet out there and I did step on it just to kind of crunch it down just a little bit, the same as I did with the front one. That made it a lot easier to fit it in here. And as you can see in the Z4, it kind of tilts over a little bit, and this heat shield made it a little bit harder, but I wasn't going to remove that. But I was able to get it on the flange for the turbo outlet, that adapter. I kind of just kneeled up here and try to fit it as best as I could. So my whole body was up here. I was kneeling on the manifold and the strut tower over there, just trying to get that inlet onto the turbo, but I was able to, so you guys will be able to too. I didn't have to remove the downpipes like I said before. So once I tighten this clamp, we're going to move on to the next step, which will be removing the catch can from the PCV system right there. And I already have this loose, so all it will be is a PCV system. And we're going to be moving the oil catch can to the other side. Not sure how that's going to work out. I may have to look for another solution. Otherwise, for the time being, it's just going to hang and not mount anywhere, because you're going from the driver's side over to the passenger side for the oil catch can. And this little adapter sensor is going to be going in here. So I'll show you guys more once I have that solved and mounted up. Alright boys, I did a little innovating on the vacuum canisters, and as you can see, I actually completely redid my vacuum system. So it is a bit longer, but not much more vacuum line than I had before. So it's not a crazy amount, but basically you can see that I routed everything all the way back here. I used a self-tapper on an existing bracket here for the windshield wiper fluid, so it's not leaking, guys. The fluid's not going to leak out. It was on the bracket, not on the actual tank. And then there's an existing screw or bolt over there. You can kind of see it. I just used an 11 millimeter nut and tightened the other vacuum canister back there. So we made use of the Z4 E89 space back here in the passenger side corner, filled it with the canisters. And what I did is I also went ahead and ordered a new oil catch can system. And with that system, it's going to use AN fittings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this existing bolt over here and mount the oil catch can over here, and then route the hoses down to here. And the PCV system, as you can see, I disconnected it. So right there, it's kind of open right now. So I covered it with a towel. But I'm waiting on that oil catch can to arrive, and I can show you guys how I'm going to mount that up. Here we have the crank bolt capture kit and the harmonic balancer here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw on the harmonic balancer and then the bolt capture kit. It's pretty straightforward. The harmonic balancer goes on first, and then we go ahead and throw these on, and I'll let you know what to torque these down to. I'm just going to use blue Loctite here on these bolts. I'll show you guys once it's completed. All right, guys, so make sure you use an Allen bit here to get those bolts on. And before you even screw them in all the way, make sure that that crank hub capture is lined up with all the holes. So maybe take one bolt and try to screw it in into each one of the holes and make sure that it's going in properly before you go ahead and completely put each of them in. But just like a wheel, go crisscross on each one of them. Make sure they're all going down all the way evenly and tight. And then once you're done, torque them to about 20 foot-pounds or 25 foot-pounds, and also do crisscross on that torque sequence as well. And make sure that this harmonic balancer does not move when you're torquing them down and tightening them. So either have somebody else hold that harmonic balancer just to make sure that it doesn't slip or move when you're putting those on. So it's important that this harmonic balancer goes on nice and even and smooth. So just take your time with doing that. Do not try to rush it. But once you have it in, it's all set. And as you guys know, I did try to kind of cheaply refinish that harmonic balancer. I didn't put too many coats of paint on it. Just one, just because it was looking really bad and I didn't want to spend $800 on another harmonic balancer. But now we're going to go ahead and put in the belt tensioner and idler pulley, just so we have those in, and then also put on the belt while we're at it. The idler pulley goes right here in this hole, and then the tensioner goes over here. So you'll guys see once I got those both in, and I'll show you, and then we'll move on to the belt orientation and how it goes. So with all the cleaning, this also got a little rusty here, which I don't like. I'll try to clean that up as well. But yeah, we're making some progress on this. Just kind of doing different things at a time. The tensioner, the idler pulley, and the belt are all on. So you can see the orientation of the belt here if you guys need that. I torqued down the bolts down to 40 Newton meters. So if you guys want to follow that, otherwise there are other specs online there. I think it ranges from like 38 to 60. I just went with 40. Worst case scenario, I'll hear some sound coming from the pulleys, but I think it should be fine. I did 40 on my other N54 car, and it was perfectly fine. So this is all done. I'm just going to get the caps back on, and the belt system should be good. The caps are now on, and we can move on to the next thing. For the coolant level sensor, there's an extension harness that comes with the Precision Raceworks kit. So you can see that I connected the extension harness here. The OEM coolant level sensor connector is right here below it. I connected it, zip tied it to this hole here, then zip tied it over here, ran it over here, and then I started to follow the cross brace bars here. I tucked the wire behind this bar and then zip tied it all the way down. You can see some of the zip ties. And then once it reached that intersection there in the middle, I tucked it in there and then followed the other brace all the way up on the back side still, so it doesn't show. So I still ran it there all the way behind the brace, and you can see even back here too, another zip tie. And then it comes up right here So here's the end of the extension. Plenty of wire. Precision Raceworks did a good job measuring with that, even if this is the Z4 E89 and not the 135i or 335i. So I'm not routing it anymore because it still might have to change a little bit once I get that 335D expansion tank. That should mount up right here, except on the Z4 E89 you'll notice that on this hole where the first mounting point's gonna mount up, there's nothing there to bolt into. So what we're gonna have to do is use a rivet gun and put in a threaded insert here in order for it to mount up. After that, I'm not 100% sure on this next part, but we're also going to maybe be drilling a hole over in this area too to get that other side of the bracket to bolt down here, and then also use another threaded insert with the rivet gun here. So that's down the line here. I just wanted to show you guys me routing this extension harness properly. Once that 335D coolant tank comes in from the mail, we'll go ahead and start trying to mount that and then get this connected, and the coolant tank will be relocated to this side. We'll just be missing the connection from the hose on the bottom end, which I'll also show because I still haven't mounted that bottom hose system that goes all the way down and connects to the subframe. So we still got some more stuff to do. I extended the electrical connector for the PCV system. So remember guys, it was unplugged and kind of just dangling here. Well, it needs to reach the passenger side. So I picked up some 20 gauge wire to extend it, and I picked up these heat shrink butt connectors and then used that 28 gauge wire to extend the connector. So we have 2 points of connection right here and back here. So what I'm going to do is tape this up and kind of just use some electrical tape to keep it together. But I am going to get some of this wire protectant. I believe it's like heat resistant too, to go over it. And then I'm just going to loop it through this loom over here and then over to the other side. So I'll do that and I'll show you guys the finished product. All right, here I have the wire protectant on the cable, and it's running across the loom inside of that cover plate for the loom all the way to the other side. And here it comes out. You can see the cable right there. Also has protectant over here. And then once we get that fitting put in here with that sensor, we can go ahead and connect it. But it's just sitting here waiting for now. So ECS Tuning has these adapters. So we actually had to delete the flapper valve on this. So as you can see here, I have an adapter that goes here. It allows us to use an AN connection here, and we actually lose the flapper valve that goes there. So I'll show you guys that quickly to remind you guys. That's the flapper valve right there. So we're gonna lose that. It's not too much of a big deal. I did want to keep it, but I already bought these adapters and they're like $25 each. So that's the first one. The second one clips onto the 90-degree sensor here for the PCV system. So you can see that I got it clipped on here already. So we have to get this onto the rear inlet there. So you can see the spot for it to go. It's very, very tight. So it's not really easy to get on, but I'm going to keep trying to get it on completely and secure. Then we can go ahead and connect our extended harness here and move on to the next step. I will make sure to put these adapters in the description if you guys decide to go this way. All right, boys, and this is what we have so far for our oil catch can setup. So this is just an Amazon oil catch can, but using AN fittings. So I had to cut these hoses to length with a Dremel. The best way to do that is to wrap the area where you're going to cut in tape and then use a Dremel to cut it. You'll get a clean cut. So this one's pretty short, as you can see here. It goes straight to the PCV system here. And then this one, I routed all the way over here, down here with a 90-degree fitting, which we're going to fit on that 90-degree sensor. I'm still having trouble getting that sensor into the inlet. but I'm still working on that. I just wanted to show you guys the setup that I have right now with this catch can. It came with this bracket, which was perfect for what I needed. I just had to move the heat shield a little bit, so you might want to adjust that. And with the car vibrating, you kind of want to be careful for anything touching because you don't want any odd noises. The good thing about this heat shield is that it's easily bendable and you can adjust it. But yeah, we're making a lot of use of this space back here for the Z4 because as of right now, we have the vacuum canisters back here and now an oil catch can. As you can see, guys, this is really coming along, but something can always go wrong, especially with all these new things that are in this area. And I think my biggest obstacle is going to be the radiator and how much bigger it is than OEM. I'm starting to kind of rethink on that. Maybe I should have gone with OEM, but we won't know until we put the radiator in. The new oil catch can setup is completed. So you can see I already showed you guys the PCV system over here and where it routes to the oil catch can right there. And it has its own little air filter there. And then when we go over here to the side, I looped it through the middle of the heat shield and kind of looped it again. And then we have our connection here on the relocated inlet there. So we have a hose clamp there that's holding that 90-degree sensor in place. And we have our ECS tuning adapter there that you can see that then hooks up to the AN fitting. That is complete, and I wanted to show you guys the end result of that. We can move on to the next step. Over here, we have the thermostat and the water pump. So as you can see, here is the U-shaped hose from ECS Tuning. So this is actually silicone with aluminum wrapped around it. So it's an upgraded part here that I ordered, and this is really hard to get to. So I really recommend getting this part from ECS Tuning, which I want to give props to ECS Tuning for starting to create their own parts, which have been really great. Here is another ECS tuning part. So you can see that this is also silicone. And this is the Mickey Mouse hose that goes to the Mickey Mouse flange. And as you can see, this is already connected as well. So those are two hoses that you want to just go ahead and connect before you even install the water pump and the thermostat. We're going to throw on the water pump first, connect the proper hoses. And once we do that, we'll go ahead and throw in the thermostat and once again connect the proper hoses. Update, I ended up putting the 90-degree or 45-degree coolant feed pipe silicone hose on here as well before putting it on. I tried to put the water pump on with this onto the car already, but it was really, really tough. I wasn't getting it on, so I decided to try it this way. So I put this hose on the water pump and I'm going to see if I can get it in a lot easier this way. Well, boys, water pump is in and complete. So you can see that I got the 90-degree or 45-degree coolant feed pipe silicone hose. And you can see the U-shaped hose, the aluminized silicone hose in the back there that I showed you guys that I pre-installed before mounting this water pump up. So that helped a lot. Make sure to put those two hoses before you even try to mount this water pump. And then we got the one E-Torx bolt on the top and then the two on the bottom here. Those are done. I put some blue Loctite on them just to make sure they don't vibrate out. And they are also tight. So make sure that you remember to also get the connector back on for the water pump. You don't want to forget that. You can see that it's plugged in there. So the way that I did it is, it's really weird because I ran it through there. You can see the cabling. Try to tuck it away because we still have to put the thermostat on and mount that up. And I also looped that hose that you see there that's open with the silicone grease so that I can slide in the thermostat. So make sure you have a hose clamp ready for that before you even mount the thermostat so you don't forget. And also make sure to orientate everything so you can access the hose clamps and tighten them from the bottom. That's what I did with all my other clamps that I have on. I can access them to tighten them from here at the bottom. You can see there's another one right there that I can access. Let's go ahead and throw on this thermostat. Thermostat is now in. So with the thermostat, that was a real pain in the ass. Only because the aluminized ECS U-shaped silicone hose, it was really hard to get it onto the backside of the thermostat from here. And what I ended up doing was kind of pushing back this heat shield. So hopefully if you have kind of like a average sized forearm or smaller, you can fit your hand up there and get the back of the hose secure so that you can push against it with the thermostat to get that on. But it is a tight fit just because that silicone hose is really tight. It will fit, it just takes a lot of work. Once you get that on, you can put the clamp in a way that you can access it from below and tighten it. And then don't forget to also connect this connector to the thermostat like we did with the water pump. They both need an electrical connection connected. And once that's all done, we can go ahead and move on with the other hoses. So the other major hose that we're going to be doing next is the one that ran across the subframe here, the lower subframe. It's one of the biggest hoses that tees off quite a bit into a lot of sections. So we're going to do that next. I'm going to get this electrical connector connected before I forget. You don't want to forget anything, any steps. Here's the 10mm bolts that you have to tighten to secure the thermostat onto the water pump, so don't forget about those as well. The good thing about me making a video and all this is I can go back and kind of remind myself of things that I disconnected or unplugged. So I'll go ahead and do that. Alright guys, I moved on to the longest hose that I was just talking about. I mounted it up back onto the lower subframe. You guys saw me take it off, so I didn't want to explain it too much. The only difference is we are relocating the coolant reservoir. So normally this hose right here that you guys see would go straight up into the coolant expansion tank. But we have a clamp on here with a different heater hose that goes all the way to the other side. So I'm trying to manage this, and it's actually super long, so I'm cutting it down to size. I'm trying to get the right measurement so I have the perfect length for the new reservoir. I wanted to also note that to make sure that this clamp is facing correctly, don't tighten it until you're down here because it has the potential of hitting the intercooler connection here. So you might want to adjust that before you get this on, because you're also going to be hooking up to the thermostat over here, and depending on how you place that clamp, it'll make it harder to connect. Same with this other hose over here that will go to the radiator. Make sure to move that so that it doesn't get in the way of anything else. So we only have that connected there. And then as for these other hoses, this is another hose that tees off over here in the middle. This will be going to the transmission cooler, which we haven't installed quite yet. And then as we go over here into the driver's side of the car, it connects to the HVAC system back there. One of the hoses that we already replaced in the beginning of the video, I just hooked that back up. It's the lower HVAC system hose. This one's the upper. You can see it over here. That will connect to the upper radiator hose. So yeah, it's looking good here. I'm not too sure on this heater hose that's for the relocated reservoir because we are doing the CSF radiator, which is a lot thicker. So I'm hoping that this does not rub against anything like the fan shroud, because the radiator is going to have to go on and then the fan shroud. I feel like that's going to be a lot of space taken up here, and hopefully we don't hit this. Usually a lot of people run it below the subframe or behind it, but I think this is the best placement for it here, kind of zip tied to this cross brace and maneuvered over here. You want to also be careful because that thermostat housing, I tried to look for an all aluminum thermostat. I know they do make one, and it's really weird to find / hard to find, I guess. And it was an earlier provision, I believe. Not quite sure. Other people can correct me on that. But I think an aluminum thermostat would be a lot better. And the reason that I bring that up is because this big heater hose is putting a lot of strain on this connection over here, and BMW's OEM connectors are plastic. I'm hoping that it doesn't crack or split, anything like that. So yeah, this is it for now on this hose. We're going to be moving on. I think the next step will be to cut this heater hose to length so that I can hook it up to the expansion tank. So I'm going to show you guys what I ended up doing with that relocated expansion tank and how it looks right now. All right, boys. So this is the 335D expansion tank. And what I did was, there's actually a hole here, but it doesn't have any threads. So what I ended up doing, I used a rivet gun to put a threaded insert into the hole. It was one of the M8 rivet inserts, so that I was able to bolt in a M8 bolt, any sort of M8 bolt that you choose. That will hold it on. There was one issue though. So as you can see, this other mounting point, I had to trim it back a little bit because it wasn't going all the way over in order for me to bolt this down. The holes weren't lining up. So I had to trim this down, as you can see, not much, nothing too crazy. But I did trim that, so that was the only modification that I did on this 335D expansion tank. And this has a lifetime warranty with ECS tuning. I know a lot of people go with the aluminum one, but if you buy one with a lifetime guarantee, there's no sense in spending a crap ton of money on the aluminum one. This isn't fully in place quite yet. I just put it there to mock it up. I'm still going to run a hose to the overflow section. There's a nipple on the bottom of the expansion tank, which I'll show you guys once I get the proper hose diameter to get on there. And I'm going to run it through the fender so it drips out on the outside of the engine instead of puddling up in here. So yeah, we still have that connection there at the bottom. I already connected the sensor, which, remember guys, we also relocated the sensor with that Precision Raceworks relocated harness, or extended harness, which we zip tied. So it ended up connecting. You can see the wire right there in the middle of the screen. I already connected that, so it's connected to the expansion tank, even though it's not final yet. And I'll show you guys the OEM connection that we cut off earlier in the video. I have it saved right here. So that's what we're going to be mounting up to the heater hose and using a clamp. So you can see, guys, how long this hose from ECS Tuning is. This was their recommended hose for relocating that reservoir. I don't know why they made it that long, but it's definitely not the correct length. We'll have to cut it down a lot more. All right, going in a little more in depth on this expansion tank, I can clearly show you the rivet here, the threaded insert. So there you can see it in the hole where there is nothing. It was empty before. Here we have the connection here for the level sensor, and then the bare connection that we still have to connect here from the relocated hose, which I've routed back here. I'm still doing a little bit of thinking because it's a tight fit. I don't know if this is where I want it quite yet. We're still trying different routing options, just so that when I mount everything back up, I don't have to take everything apart again just to reroute this. There's just so many different ways that we could route this, and I'm still trying different options out. We did go ahead and get a vacuum hose here, 3/4 to fit onto this little nipple here on the expansion tank, which we're going to run down the fender over here in this area. We're just going to dump it straight down. This other connection, we're still waiting to connect to the radiator as well. And like I told you guys, we're not going to be using this mounting point. We're only going to be using this one over here. So yeah, once I figure all that out and I get this 100% mounted onto here, I'll show you guys what that looks like. But I'm still mocking everything up and trying to find the best option. Here's the Nissan's aftermarket transmission cooler. So we're going to throw that on. It's pretty simple. We're going to reconnect the transmission lines and that hose that you see at the bottom that tees off from the bottom subframe hose system. So both coolant and transmission oil goes through this. So there are just 3 connections. We're going to get those connected, and for now I'm going to zip tie it to one of the bars so it doesn't put too much stress on those lines. So just to hold it for now, but I'll throw this on right now. That is now connected, and there's actually one more connection, guys. I'm sorry about that. There's one in the back here that will be going to the radiator, but obviously we don't have the radiator on quite yet, so we'll have to wait on that. But for now, that is all mounted up. The expansion tank is bolted down, as you can see here, and I also connected the lower hose for the expansion tank that comes off of the thermostat that I routed down there below. So I'm just letting you guys know right now, this is just a test on that hose. There is a possibility that I might have to reroute it differently, but this is what I thought would be best for now to try out. So now that that is done and complete, I can move on to trying to mock up the radiator. So I'm going to show you guys the radiator and what it looks like and how it comes and what we have to attach to it. Here is the radiator from CSF, and you can see that that's the front. Once we go to the back here, you can see how thick it is too. I honestly thought it would be even thicker, so I'm kind of happy, but I won't really know until I mock it up. So there's still a possibility that it's too thick and we might run into some issues and have to do some modifications. But here we can see the bare connections here, and then you'll also notice that there is an empty space there and here. One of them is kind of rough because I think they could have made an aluminum outlet like they did over here for down there, just because I still have to, and I believe this is only on the automatic transmission. So I'm glad that I saved this from the OEM radiator. All I did was change out the O-ring here, so that's a brand new O-ring, but this is still plastic and that'll have to be bolted onto the radiator. Same with this hose that connects to the automatic transmission cooler. This is new as well. All part numbers again will be put in the description, but this will also bolt down onto the radiator, so that's another plastic connection there. So we have to get these 2 parts onto the radiator. So I'll get that done and show you guys what it looks like. So I laid down the radiator the way it's going to go into the car, and you can see that now I have this hose bolted down and this connection bolted down. Pretty straightforward and easy, just because there's a hole and that's the guideline of how it bolts on. It only goes on one way, so you can't really mess that up. So it's the moment of truth now. It's time to drop this in and see how much space we're left with and where we go from there, which will probably be putting in the electric fan over there that I have set aside. So let's get to it. As the radiator is in, just make sure you're really careful, because this plastic shroud that surrounds the radiator is really brittle, and you just want to be careful that it slides in evenly and straight, just perfect, because it's going to move the AC condenser too and might not line up quite well. So just be careful, keep moving it back and forth until it's in correctly. So I'm going to give you guys a good look at the hose here for the thermostat that goes to the radiator. So I want to show you guys how it routes. So this is the way that it routes. You can see here the hose starts out on the left here and it's already connected to the radiator, goes behind the AC lines and this brace, and then connects to the thermostat. We have the coolant feed pipe hose connected to the radiator down there. You can see that's the smaller hose. And then on this side, we have the automatic transmission cooler hose connected to the automatic transmission cooler. And then here I just have a glove covering up the outlet of the radiator for now. But that's going to connect, we're not going to connect that quite yet. We still have to drop in the radiator fan. And this is the space that we have. As you can see, my relocated hose right here is kind of running in the front side, and I don't know if that's going to clear with the radiator fan. I'm still mocking up options and seeing how I can route it differently to be able to get the radiator fan in and make this work. I'm going to keep trying to get the radiator fan in. I don't know if this is going to work. We might try something else. I did try to route the relocated hose behind the cross brace bars, but what ended up happening is that it pinches the hose of where it connects to the thermostat. So that doesn't work. So I can't route it behind here. It's just been a real pain in the ass trying to route this hose. I know a lot of people run it under the subframe, but even then it also pinches. I think it's the type of hose that I have. So I would really like if they came out with a hose that would work perfectly and you wouldn't really have to cut it and try to mock it up in order to get it to fit correctly. But I'll update you guys once I am all done. And if you can remember, guys, we also had this little foam insert or like rubber insert that went on top of the old radiator. We're going to see if we can fit it on here as well. I'm just trying to focus on that fan first. All right, boys, I made a mistake. So on the original heater hose for the relocation of the expansion tank, I actually ended up cutting it too short and installing it wrong. So too bad on my part, but after so much work on this car, with that being my only mistake, I will take it. So I had to order another hose, but everything happens for a reason, honestly. And it's kind of funny because I didn't know that Turner Motorsports actually makes a silicone version. So I ordered that and it just came in today, and you can see the 90-degree on that end and then the straight side on that other end. So I'm going to go ahead and install this side on the thermostat and then try to route it the best that I can so it doesn't get in the way of the electric fan when I try to once again install the electric fan. So this stays out of the way, and that way I can actually fit everything. It's still going to be a tight fit because I noticed my oil cooler lines do get pretty close to the electric fan. But anyways, enough talking. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this. So you guys already saw me install the other one, so I won't really show me installing this one. It's pretty much the same thing, just a silicone one, and it's a little longer. So I'll show you what it looks like in the end, but I'm going to throw this on now. So I still had to customize it a bit. As you can see, that right angle degree on the hose is connected, but I had to shorten it a bit. The reason why is it was because of this other coolant hose that connects to the thermostat. Kind of gets in the way a bit. So make sure that you cut that a little shorter just to get that out of the way. And then what I did was route it lower here below the subframe. Held it there with some zip ties, not too tight to cut off the fluid flow, and then I routed it through here. So I still gave it plenty of slack, and just in case I need to move it a little bit more when I install the electric fan and the intercooler so that it doesn't get in the way. I might have to strap it down over here on this side, but there's plenty of slack still. I didn't want to cut myself short again. But there it is installed. I also put the connections on, so it is once again hooked up to the lower expansion tank up there and the thermostat over here. So I just wanted to show you guys down here, and I'll go ahead and start trying to put the fan in. Good news, the fan is in, and it went in a lot easier with that routing of the relocated hose. And as you can see here, it's connected to the coolant reservoir that I didn't really show you guys, but kind of just mentioned. The bad news is that the oil cooler lines down there, they're way too close to the fan. It's kind of hard to see. You can see about there in the middle of the screen. They're now too close to the fan, and every time that the fan spins, it will hit them. I'm going to see if I can zip tie them up against the bar or something to hold them back further so they don't touch the fan. We're going to see. The other issue is that these oil cooler lines are also touching the fan. And long story short, this is how I ended up with a huge oil mess all over my car and almost ruined my engine. I actually don't know. It still might be ruined, to be honest. So I might be doing all this for nothing, but with everything that I checked, the engine is fine. It's been running fine. But what ended up happening is on my old lines, the fan rubbed against the oil cooler lines and cut them. So oil started spraying everywhere. And now it is once again touching the fan because it's way too close now with this thicker aluminum fan.
And I don't think I mentioned, but I did put the sealer here, this rubber pad that was on the old radiator. It transferred over to the new one. I know I mentioned it, but I don't think I showed it. So anyhow, first I'm going to take care of the transmission cooler lines, try to see if I can secure those. Then I'm going to take care of these oil cooler lines, which, as you can see, I put some padding on the fan so it wouldn't cut them. I don't know if that's actually going to work or not. You can see it right there too, that I put another pad there. Anywhere where it makes contact with the oil cooler line, so I'm going to put some here too. I don't know if that's going to help. I'm going to definitely make sure to kind of check on these every now and then.
I fixed the issues with
The rubbing on the transmission cooler lines and the oil cooler lines. So then I went ahead and installed the upper radiator hose. And as you can see, there's also this hose attached, which I'll put the part number, but it's made for the 335D expansion tank. So that fits not perfectly, but good enough to use here. So that's also connected. So you can see connected to the radiator, connected to the oil filter housing, connected to the expansion tank. And as I told you guys before, the HVAC system hose that connects to the bottom of that upper radiator hose. So now we have everything connected, and I added coolant. So I topped off the coolant. It took about almost 2 gallons of mixed BMW coolant to fill this system up. So I haven't installed the intercooler, as you guys saw, and not everything's fully back into place quite yet, just because I want to check for leaks. And I thought the best idea would be to actually go through the bleeding system procedure on this car with the intercooler out. So not actually start the car, but just do the bleeding procedure, which is having the heat on low and the heat on the highest temperature setting and holding the gas pedal for about 12 seconds. So I'm going to activate that system, let it run, see if anything leaks out. I have to connect the battery, so I'll do that and show you guys. Moment of truth for leaks, boys. So you'll hear the water pump running here. I started the process and set a timer for 12 minutes to let me know, but I'll see if you guys can catch the sound of the water pump working. There you can hear it circulating. So no problem without the intercooler on right now, and it helps look for leaks as well. So I do recommend doing this before reinstalling everything, especially the intercooler. I'll go around and especially underneath too and see if I'm leaking anywhere before I put everything back together. So this will take a bit, but I'll let you guys know what I find.
Well, boys, after
Everything, that's it for this. I have the radiator support back in, as well as this little cover, which is pretty much useless, but it covers the gaps here. It's directing the air over here, even though I need it over here now. They don't have anything aftermarket for the Z4 that directs the air over here. Hopefully in the future someone just makes one that just kind of directs the air over here. You don't really need too much, but as of right now I just have this in. So both of those things are in. The intercooler is also in, which you guys saw me take out. It's not really that hard. It was 2 bolts and then putting the clamps back on. So just doing everything in reverse. There wasn't any leak, so I lucked out on that. So like I said, the only issue that I ran into was what I told you guys before, was that routing of that relocated hose. So make sure you just zip tie that and route it properly, as you saw earlier in the video. I got that down and out of the way. It isn't in the way of the intercooler either, and it's silicone, which is awesome. So I'll make sure to have everything in the description, all the parts I use, for anyone that has a Z4 or a 135i, 335i. This kind of works the same, just some little things will be a little different. Mainly the coolant reservoir, but as you saw in the video is explained. Also, I really like this Harbor Freight flashlight that goes across here. It's so funny that I only bought it towards the end of this video. It would have really been nice to have the whole time, but always be prepared with lighting, because that would have made the job a lot easier instead of just wanding a flashlight around. But shout out to Harbor Freight.
This video was insane, guys. So it's pretty much a movie. It was super long. As you'll see, this whole video was over 90 minutes of me just overhauling the Z4 with the coolant system and other things, as you saw while I was there. So hopefully this helps you guys that have the Z4 N54 and answers any questions that you guys have. I'm glad to get this video out to the Z4 community, and hopefully it helps you guys out. If you have any questions, make sure to ask me. I'm probably also going to break down this video into other videos specifically for people that want the shorter videos and want to see specific things on the Z4 for the coolant system or any of the other things I did. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. I'll catch you guys on the flip side.